Jumping back here into the Chip Shot Football podcast and into another segment that I think it's safe to say that I was not planning on talking about, heading into this weekend, this past weekend, in all the playoff games and everything like that. I didn't think Tyreek Hill was going to say what he ended up saying after the game against the New York Jets. And this all really started and had to do mainly with the fact that Miami had an opportunity to make the playoffs yesterday if they beat the New York Jets, and the Denver Broncos ended up losing. But obviously, neither of those things happened yesterday, so it doesn't really matter. And for the Dolphins, it's another frustrating year with a lot of injuries, missing the playoffs this year after they made it last season, and just always feeling like they were dealt the short straw, basically, right? Like, it felt like last year they obviously didn't have Tua, so they were hard done by that. This year, again, Tua wasn't there, and there was a lot of injuries and just a lot of bad things that derailed this season, right? It felt like they weren't given the best shot to go out there and compete, because when Tua was out there, they played pretty well, and they had some pretty competitive games all in all. But with the culmination of yesterday and missing the playoffs after a very long and frustrating season, I'd imagine, those frustrations started to boil over with one Tyreek Hill, most of all, because he didn't hold back in his post-game comments about his future in regards to the Dolphins and pretty much where he sees himself in 2025. And I have it up here for you guys to kind of look at it as I also read it, because it was pretty straightforward and pretty direct on what Tyreek Hill is pretty much thinking of doing heading into 2025. He said after the game that this is my first time I haven't been in the playoffs, man, so I just got to do what's best for me and my family. If that's here or wherever the case may be, I'm finna open that door for myself. I'm opening the door. I'm out, bro. It was great playing here, but at the end of the day, I gotta do what's best for my career because I'm too much of a competitor to be just out there. And after that kind of statement that he made, he was asked pretty directly by one of the reporters if he was planning, pretty much if he was just planning on leaving Miami. And you see Tyreek Hill kind of start to have a response, but kind of just shakes his head and just walks away from the question. And he also posted something on X afterwards that I don't have up here, but it pretty much stated the same message that it looks like this is the end for Tyreek Hill and the Miami Dolphins in their relationship. And the response came after also. I wasn't aware of it during the game, but afterwards there were some reports that came out that apparently Tyreek kind of took himself out of the game in the fourth quarter, probably because of those frustrations and just pretty much being done with this season as a whole. And he wasn't out there for the last couple drives, which many speculated that had to do with this entire situation, how he was just checked out and just essentially quitting on his team. And I don't like saying it like that, but it's hard to kind of pivot away from it or not direct it in that direction, because when you don't go out there, and I know the season's rough and it looks like you're not going to be playing, but the last thing probably any NFL player, any team guy should really do is, have that sort of image follow him, right? You don't want to be the guy like a Devontae Campbell, like an Antonio Brown, to just kind of leave and prioritize your personal and individual beliefs, feelings, emotions, and just kind of say, forget about these guys. I'm done with this team. It's not working out for me, so I'm done with this game. I'm just not going to play, right? And you don't want that sort of image or message following you, but it's hard for Tyreek because of what happened at the end of this game, not playing, and also saying something like this afterwards. In hindsight, obviously, I think that he should have cooled off a little bit and maybe not said or be this direct after the game, because after the game, obviously the emotions and the tensions are running high, right? After the season, after you come to that realization on the field how you're not going to be playing in the postseason, and like he said, for the first time in his career, that must be like super, like an unimaginable frustration, right? Because this is your first time not playing into, January and whatnot. So that's obviously one thing. And I think in hindsight, the most reasonable thing should have been like, give one-word answers, give no responses, just be very bland with the media, but don't kind of all, like, just air it out like this, just like, 20 minutes, 30 minutes after the game ended. Because you're never going to think the responses through. You're never going to really think about the repercussions it could bring and everything like that. So I think in hindsight, probably should have held off on that and maybe said it like on X would have been fine, or on a podcast or something afterwards. I think all of that would have been better than pretty much saying to reporters in the locker room as well, where I'm sure other teammates and everybody else could hear him basically say that he's leaving, that giving an emotional response like this was definitely not the way to go. But again, in a sense where I don't want to defend him, but it has been a pretty rough year for Tyreek Hill. He failed to exceed 1,000 yards. He finished with 959, when in his first 2 years he exceeded 1,700. And, he's only just gotten there, and there was always the idea that him getting there was going to push Miami over the edge. But that's where the conversation kind of enters a new realm, per se. And, you talk about the situation with Tyreek and how we even got here and why all of this kind of starting to boil over now, I think makes Tyreek Hill look even worse. And this kind of response makes Tyreek Hill look even worse than, maybe not saying anything or just having it play out in a different way, right? A situation like this was never really going to benefit Tyreek Hill, and I think this just rather hurt him than, maybe increase his chances of, trying to be traded elsewhere or just be accepted anywhere elsewhere, because he's going to be sought after, right? Just because he is Tyreek, he has otherworldly talents, right? The speed and everything like that. But, I mean, in a scenario where it all played out in the most ironic way, because you have a reason to be upset if you're Tyreek, right? Because things haven't gone your way, but it's not at the fault of, like, Dolphins are just bad, like, I'm not getting any help or anything like that. Tyreek knew the kind of situation that he was heading into when he signed for Miami, right? And not only when he signed for Miami, but when he made the decision to know that he was leaving Patrick Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs, right? When you make a decision like that, it obviously has to do with the money, because you're not going to find another situation better than having arguably the best quarterback ever throw you the football. And the stats with him in Kansas City are obviously different with him in Miami, especially this year. So making that decision to leave Kansas City and leaving that dynasty, that juggernaut of a team, and choose the money, and, there's no problem with going and getting paid and everything like that. That's fine. That's great for Tyreek. If that's a decision, if you can go out and get more money, go out and do it, right? But you have to know making that decision brings you the possibility that it's probably not going to be better on the other side, right? The grass is probably not going to be greener on the other side, because you're leaving in such an ideal scenario that you can't even imagine it being even better than that. And he tried to play it out like that when he talked about Tua and kind of hyped him up a little bit as being more accurate than Patrick, and really trying to be, positive and upbeat about it. Again, no problems with that. But when things start to go bad, when you might not make the playoffs or you're not winning the division each and every year like you are in Kansas City, you can't go back and kind of whine about it and say something like this, right? Like, the Dolphins are what's the problem, or like this whole situation just wasn't what you thought it could be, when you knew when you signed for the money that it could be a possibility that it could end up being like this, right? So you can't lash out when you get your money and things aren't going your way and still, decide to go this route because you knew it was going to be a possibility. So it's a weird situation because it's so fresh after the season, right? It's not like we're in February or anything like that, right? It's the day after, and he said something like this. So I think we're at a point of no return now. I don't think that you can, as the Miami Dolphins, and Mike McDaniels was pretty, I think, reserved about it after the game, where he kind of gave out a message like he wants players that want to be here to be on this team, right? And he didn't address it too directly, but it didn't look like obviously he was too thrilled about what happened or this whole situation going forward. So in the end, I think Tyreek will probably just end up getting what he wants and being traded, because there's no benefit really in forcing him to stay. If he's already said something like this, and even if he comes out and apologizes or anything like that, I think that that bridge is pretty much burned. I don't think you come back from saying something like this and just saying pretty much that you're going to leave right after the game. And the fact that you didn't even finish the game also isn't something you could just come back you can come back from just like that, because now your teammates have it in their heads like this guy just left in the fourth quarter. What's going to stop him from doing it again, right? So I mean, it is tough because he is under contract for the next 2 years. He has a 27.7 cap hit in 2025 and a $51.9 million cap hit in 2026. So there's got to be a little bit of that and a little bit of negotiating with that as well. But in overall, just this whole situation is just really not a good look on Tyreek. I think definitely overall it could have been handled better. He could have approached this better. I always think it's better to do it behind closed doors, but now that he's aired it out like this, this relationship is only going to end pretty negatively. So we'll see when it does get resolved. I mean, people are still going to want to acquire Tyreek Hill, obviously, right? Like the Cowboys stand out. Washington stands out. I don't know, that team like the Raiders, the Chargers is also another one, but they don't really have a lot of cap space. I'm just going off of teams that need wide receivers, like the Patriots, obviously. The Arizona Cardinals would be interesting. So there's a bunch of teams out there that would want a talent like him. But again, painting yourself in a light like this won't really won't really help your opportunities to find a new team just like that. But again, when you're talented like that, a lot of things can be overlooked, quite honestly. But we'll see where that takes us. Just another storyline to take us into the offseason, right, for some of these teams. But moving on from the teams that won't be playing into January, we're going to go back to talking about the playoffs. Kind of an overarching look at the playoffs. We're going to be talking about the matchups, the schedule for this upcoming weekend, and maybe some upsets that we could see, in my opinion. So we're going to be talking about that after this upcoming break. Don't go anywhere.